All right, let's jump right into the fascinating world of male reproductive health. We've got some really interesting research on testicular development you sent over, and
Yeah.
we're going to break it down
Yeah.
for everybody out there.
They're going to be good. We've got a really good mix of some long-term studies, some really good in-depth reviews. So
Yeah.
it should give us a chance to really kind of get the bigger picture of what's going on.
Yeah, and this is important stuff, right? Because we're talking about, a surgery. The timing of it could impact someone's future fertility, or why standardized measurements matter, even for,
Oh.
that.
Oh, yeah.
So let's get into it. First up, this study from Acta Pediatrica. It looks at boys with undescended testicles. It's more common than you might think. They followed these boys, comparing those who had surgery at 9 months versus 3 years old.
Yeah, it's called cryptorchidism.
Yeah.
And basically, one of the fascinating findings is that they saw that early surgery led to better testicular growth by puberty.
Interesting. So by age 16,
Yeah.
they actually saw a difference in the testicular volume.
Yeah, and it really highlights the importance of early intervention. We talk about this concept of catch-up growth, where, we assume the body will compensate naturally. But this research shows that that's not always the case. Even the boys whose testicles descended naturally, but they descended later, had smaller testicular volume than those who never had the condition in the first place.
Wow. So there's like a prime time for development. And if you miss that window even by a little bit, it has a lasting impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really underscores the importance of early detection and treatment to give those little guys the best chance to, develop properly.
Speaking of development, this next study about penile length measurement had us all kind of scratching our heads.
I will admit it sparked some interesting conversations in the office, for sure.
Right. Who knew there were so many ways to measure,
Right, exactly.
But seriously, this review was important because it revealed a lack of standardization, which was leading to inconsistent and potentially inaccurate results.
And that inaccuracy has real-world consequences. It can impact diagnoses, it can impact treatment plans, it can even impact a patient's peace of mind. We need to be able to trust that when we're taking those measurements, that they're accurate and reliable.
Absolutely. Imagine being told something is wrong, and it's based on a measurement that, who knows, maybe it wasn't even taken consistently. So thankfully, this review led to the creation of something called splint, the stretched penile length indicator technique, which is a much more standardized approach.
And splint is great because it takes into account factors that we hadn't even considered before, like room temperature, the patient's state of arousal, even whether the pubic area is being compressed during the measurement can have an impact.
Wow, it's amazing how much detail goes into getting it right. But I mean, that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive, right?
Exactly.
Uncovering those really important but often overlooked details.
Absolutely. And I think in this case, it's about making sure that we have accurate information to help guide important medical decisions.
Okay, switching gears now to a topic we can all relate to, at least vaguely, those hazy, sleep-deprived first few months of life.
A distant memory, I'm sure, for many of us.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, those early months are more crucial than you might think, especially when it comes to something called mini-puberty.
Mini-puberty, that sounds adorable. Like a tiny hormonal party?
Well, it does involve hormones. Maybe not the party kind, but it turns out babies experience a surge in hormones shortly after birth. And it's actually remarkably similar to puberty.
Really? What's the point of that? I mean, they're just tiny humans.
Right, it seems kind of odd, but this mini-puberty, especially in boys, is really crucial for kind of laying the groundwork for their reproductive health later in life. Think of like setting the stage for puberty down the road.
Interesting. Okay, so mini-puberty, big impact. What did this deep dive into mini-puberty reveal?
Well, it highlighted the importance of this early hormonal surge, particularly testosterone and luteinizing hormone, or LH. And these hormones, they stimulate testicular growth and the production of other key players like INSL3, which plays a role in testicular descent.
So those first few months are like a dress rehearsal for the main event.
Exactly. And just like with the dress rehearsal, if something goes wrong during mini-puberty, it could have long-term consequences.
And that brings us to a condition called congenital hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, or CHH for short.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
CHH is a rare genetic condition that disrupts the production or function of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, better known as GnRH.
Okay, I'm sensing a pattern here. Complex medical terms. Fascinating topics. Remind us why GnRH is important.
Yeah, so GnRH is like the conductor of the puberty orchestra, It kickstarts that entire process, including mini-puberty. So when there's not enough GnRH or it's not working properly, it can lead to underdeveloped genitals and issues with puberty later on.
So that's how it all ties back. Mini puberty, CHH, GnRH, it's all connected.
Precisely. And because CHH can have such a significant impact, early diagnosis is essential. And that's why doctors look for what we call red flags in newborns.
Red flags, like what kinds of signs?
Things like a smaller than usual penis, known as micropenis, or cryptorchidism, which we discussed earlier, where one or both testicles haven't descended. These can be indicators that the baby's hormones aren't quite on track.
So doctors are like medical detectives looking for these subtle clues to catch a potential issue early on.
Exactly, exactly. And the sooner CHH is diagnosed, the sooner treatment can begin, potentially preventing some of the more significant long-term effects.
What does treatment for CHH look like?
So the goal of treatment is to replace those missing hormones. And this often involves what's called physiological replacement of mini-puberty, using gonadotropins, which stimulate the testes.
So it's like giving the baby system a little hormonal nudge in the right direction.
Precisely, precisely. And studies have shown that it can be very effective, leading to improved testicular development and even testicular descent.
That's remarkable. So even though CHH is genetic, it's treatable.
Yeah, early diagnosis and appropriate hormone therapy can make a world of difference.
Okay, we covered a lot of ground here, from undescended testicles to mini puberty and CHH. Before we move on, let's talk about this review on puberty suppression in adolescents experiencing gender dysphoria.
Yeah, this is a complex and sensitive topic, and it's important to approach it with nuance. We're simply here to report on the findings of this review and what the research says.
Exactly. We're just sticking to the science here. And this particular review found a lack of high-quality, long-term research on the outcomes of puberty suppression, especially when it comes to effects on bone health, height, and cognitive development.
And that's crucial information to have because, we're talking about potential long-term impacts. It highlights the need for further research to help guide both medical professionals and families in making these very personal decisions.
Absolutely. Everyone deserves to make informed choices, especially when it comes to something as significant as this. All right, ready to explore another fascinating study. This next study looks at something we hear a lot about these days, and that's gender identity in young people. And no, it's not about medical interventions or anything like that. It's about understanding how young people view gender, which, as we know, is constantly evolving.
Yeah, and I think this is so important because by understanding, how young people perceive and experience gender, we can then create more inclusive and supportive environments for them.
Absolutely. And this particular study was conducted in Belgium. They surveyed a really large group of adolescents in secondary schools, and they used these specific scales to measure their attitudes towards gender roles, things like whether boys could paint their nails, or if girls should, avoid raising their voices in front of others.
Right, and these scales are really designed to capture, the nuances of gender attitudes because, again, it's not a simple, yes or no kind of thing.
It's way more complex than that. And interestingly, they found that these attitudes varied depending on three main factors: sex assigned at birth, romantic attraction, and something called gender expression.
And just to clarify here, sex assigned at birth refers to the sex a person is assigned based on, physical characteristics at birth.
Right.
Whereas romantic attraction really is about who a person is romantically or sexually attracted to.
And gender expression, that's all about how someone chooses to present themselves to the world, regardless of their gender identity. It's like fashion, wear what you want.
Exactly, exactly. And what they found was that those who identify as male at birth tended to express more traditional gender attitudes compared to those who identify as female at birth.
Interesting. So it sounds like, societal norms might have a stronger influence on, those identifying as male at birth when it comes to gender attitudes. Now, what about romantic attraction? How did that factor into all of this?
So they found that individuals reporting romantic attraction to the opposite sex tended to hold more traditional gender attitudes and body image perceptions compared to those who were attracted to the same sex or both sexes.
So there might be, more pressure to conform to those societal norms if you're in line with like heteronormative expectations. Makes you think about all the pressure young people are under these days.
Absolutely. It suggests that those societal expectations around heteronormativity can definitely influence both gender attitudes and how we view our own bodies.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. What about that last factor, gender expression? What did they find there?
So they looked at three types of gender expression: feminine, assertive, and leadership.
Hold on. How do you even begin to measure like assertiveness or leadership when it comes to gender expression.
So they used a scale that included statements like, I enjoy being a leader. I speak my mind when I disagree. I stand up for myself.
Okay, so it's really about actions and behaviors, not just appearances. I like that.
Exactly, exactly. And they found that those who scored higher on assertive and leadership gender expression actually had more positive body image, regardless of their gender identity.
That's fantastic. It really challenges the whole notion that there's only one right way to express your gender.
Exactly, exactly. I think this study really emphasizes that there are countless ways to be a boy, to be a girl, to be anyone in between, and that embracing that diversity is really crucial.
Now, shifting gears a bit here, you've also included some fascinating research on central precocious puberty, or CPP, where puberty starts much earlier than expected. And we're talking like 8 years old for girls and 9 for boys, sometimes even younger.
Yeah, and the causes of this can vary widely from, genetics, hormonal imbalances to even certain medical conditions.
Right. And this study from Italy is particularly interesting. They followed almost 200 boys with CPP over 2 decades, making it one of the largest studies of its kind.
Yeah, and it provides incredible insight into the prevalence of different causes of CPP, specifically in boys.
So what's causing these boys to hit puberty so early?
So here's the surprising part. They actually used brain MRIs to look for any abnormalities in the central nervous system. But the vast majority of the boys, about 86%, had totally normal MRIs. No tumors, no lesions, nothing out of the ordinary.
Wow, so if their brains looked fine, what on earth is causing the early puberty?
Right, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it suggests that for most boys with CPP, the root cause might be something other than what we can see on a brain scan.
Fascinating. So it could be, genetic factors or even subtle hormonal imbalances that aren't detectable through an MRI. What about the boys who did have abnormalities show up on their scans?
Yeah, so a small percentage, about 5.7%, did have brain abnormalities that were likely causing their CPP. Things like hypothalamic hamartomas, which are benign tumors, optic gliomas, and other kind of rare conditions.
So for those boys, the early puberty was directly linked to a visible issue in the brain.
Exactly, exactly. And it highlights why getting an MRI is so crucial for, children who are diagnosed with CPP. Even if it doesn't always pinpoint the cause, it at least helps rule out these more serious possibilities.
Makes sense. Now, this study also looked at the age of diagnosis for CPP. What did they find there?
So what they found was that the boys whose CPP was caused by brain abnormalities were actually diagnosed earlier, sometimes even before the age of 7.
So the earlier the onset of puberty, the more likely it is to have a more, pronounced cause, I guess.
That seems to be the trend. Yeah, it really makes you realize how much we still don't know about these developmental processes.
It really does. So what about treatment options? What can be done for boys with CPP, regardless of the cause?
So the standard treatment for CPP is gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH analog therapy.
GnRH, there it is again. It really is the conductor of the puberty orchestra.
It is. And these GnRH analogs basically work by temporarily suppressing the release of the hormones that trigger puberty.
So it's like pressing pause on the whole process for a little bit.
Exactly, exactly. This allows the child to develop at a pace that's more appropriate, physically and emotionally.
That's reassuring. But do these boys eventually go through puberty normally once they stop the GnRH analog therapy?
That's a great question. And that's actually something that this study also looked at. So they followed the boys into adulthood, and they found that across the board, regardless of whether they had normal MRIs, incidental findings, or those brain abnormalities, their final heights were within the expected range for their age.
That is good news. Sounds like the GnRH analog therapy is pretty effective in managing CPP.
Yeah, it seems to be a really valuable tool in helping these boys navigate early puberty and ultimately reach their full growth potential.
This Italian study gave us a lot to unpack regarding CPP, from the role of MRIs and the importance of early diagnosis. To the effectiveness of treatment, we've learned a lot. And speaking of fascinating scientific tools, you've also included an article on organic metal chalcogenides, or OMCs, which may seem totally unrelated at first, but trust me, listeners, it'll all make sense soon.
You see, what's really remarkable about this research is its potential in a technique called laser desorption ionization mass spectrometry, or LDIMS for short.
Okay, we're not afraid of a few syllables on this show, but seriously, what do OMCs have to do with analyzing biological samples?
So OMCs have these unique properties that make them ideal substrates, or like base layers in LDIMS. They absorb UV light incredibly well, which is essential for this technique. and they excel at transferring energy and promoting the ionization of molecules.
So they're like the unsung heroes of LDIMS, helping to reveal the secrets hidden within those biological samples.
We could say that, yeah. They're kind of like the stagehands, ensuring that the main act, the analysis, goes off without a hitch.
I like that analogy. That's good. So this article digs into the nitty-gritty of 4 different OMCs, comparing how well they perform in LDIMS.
Exactly. It's all about finding the Goldilocks substrate, the one that's just right for maximizing sensitivity and minimizing that background noise.
And did they find their Goldilocks?
They did. Out of the 4 that they tested, the copper-based OMC with a carboxylic acid functional group kind of stole the show. Enhanced signal response, cleaner background, high tolerance for salts and proteins. It really outperformed the rest.
So this copper OMC is the MVP of LDI-MS substrates. What does this mean for, like, medical diagnostics, though?
Well, the possibilities are really exciting. This article specifically mentions diagnosing central precocious puberty, or CPP, which we were just talking about.
Whoa, full circle. It all connects.
It does. It does. So by using this optimized OMC substrate in LDI-MS, researchers could potentially analyze serometabolic fingerprints, so these are those unique chemical signatures that we all have in our blood, and accurately diagnose CPP.
That's incredible. Could this tiny little OMC revolutionize how we diagnose certain medical conditions?
It has the potential, and that's what makes this research so compelling. It's about pushing the boundaries of medical diagnostics and improving patient care.
That's what we like to hear. So while this research might seem, hyper-specific, it really does have real-world implications.
Absolutely. And it also underscores how interconnected all of these scientific fields are, and how advances in one area can lead to breakthroughs in another.
I love how we can seamlessly jump from talking about mini-puberty to lasers and mass spectrometry, all in one deep dive.
It's a wild ride through the world of science, for sure. Speaking of which, we have one more fascinating study to explore.
This last study takes us back to puberty, but with a little bit of a twist. It looks at how puberty is a sensitive period for voice monitoring. I know it sounds a little random, but it actually ties in beautifully to everything we've been talking about.
It really does. We were just talking about all those, dramatic physical changes that happen during puberty. But this research dives into a less obvious but equally profound change, and that's the transformation of our voices.
Right. It's not just our bodies that are maturing. It's also how our brains and our sensory perception change as a result.
Exactly. So this study specifically looks at how that surge in testosterone during male puberty leads to those classic voice changes, the deepening of the voice as the vocal cords and the vocal tract develop.
So our brains actually have to, adapt to these new, deeper voices, too.
Precisely. And the article highlights the role of the right superior temporal sulcus, which is a brain region that's really crucial for voice production and perception. And this area actually goes through significant developmental changes during puberty to help us manage those vocal transformations.
So it's like our brains are rewiring themselves to process sound differently, adjusting to this whole new vocal landscape.
That's a great way to put it. And what's even more fascinating is that this period of vocal change might actually be a sensitive period for voice monitoring.
A sensitive period, like a prime time for learning, but for our voices.
Exactly. So during this window, the brain is incredibly adaptable and responsive to vocal input. It's fine-tuning those voice processing abilities.
Oh, that's interesting. It reminds me of how, they always say it's easier to learn a new language when you're younger.
Right. That's a great analogy. And this research suggests that this heightened sensitivity might even play a role in why some adolescents experience things like auditory hallucinations.
Wait, so hearing voices that aren't there, how does that relate to puberty?
Yeah, it's definitely complex. But researchers theorize that the combination of those fluctuating hormones, the dramatic voice changes, and the brain's increased sensitivity to sounds during puberty might actually lead to misinterpreting certain signals as external voices.
Wow, that's a pretty mind-blowing connection. So from the physical development of the tests to the neurological processes that shape our voices, puberty is clearly a time of immense transformation, both inside and out.
Absolutely. It really highlights the interconnectedness of these seemingly separate systems, and how much more there is to uncover about human development.
Well, I think it's safe to say you've given me and our listeners a lot to think about today. From the importance of early detection and intervention for conditions like cryptorchidism and CHH, to this fascinating link between voice changes and brain development, it's clear that male reproductive health is a vast and intricate field.
Yeah, and we've only just scratched the surface. But that's what makes this area of research so exciting. There are always new discoveries to be made.
Couldn't have said it better myself. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of male reproductive health. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. And until next time, keep those questions coming and never stop exploring.